Whether you're learning to love Overwatch again, or you're trying Overwatch for the first time as a brand new player, Overwatch can be very complicated and confusing, and there's a ton of things that you probably don't know. So I'm going to break down 20 Overwatch 2 tips that I wish I knew when I started playing. Now we got tons of crazy content planned, so smash that like, subscribe to support the channel, and let's get right into it. Now you need to understand the relationship between mechanical skill and game sense. Knowing what the appropriate play to make is and how to make it is game sense. Let's say you see an isolated Zen and you say, you know, as Tracer, I'm going to go on that Zen and I'm going to force him out or I'm going to kill him. And that's my plan in action. And it could be a good plan because of your game sense, but the percentage of that being successfully executed depends on your mechanical skill. This means that you could make a plan that is right on paper, but because of bad mechanical skill, the play does not work. And you could also make a play that is really poor on paper, but because of expert mechanical skill, you still make it out on top. It's important to properly assess yourself as a player and what you need to focus most on. The next thing that I wish I did when I started is learn the strengths and weaknesses of my matchups. Now, I'm planning to do a matchup guide in the future, but here's the general takeaway that gives you everything you need to know. Some characters perform optimally against other characters based on their general positions and play styles. So let's go back to that Zen Tracer example. Zen has an overall weak matchup up against Tracer, and Tracer's predominant playstyle really puts a ton of pressure on Zen. So it's important for you to acknowledge that that's a matchup that you need to be wary of and think about how you can set up favorable engagements up against that Tracer or how you can position to make that Tracer's job much more difficult. On the other side of the coin, if you're the Tracer, you need to identify where you can easily get value from, what characters just like that Zen, and how you can enact that value each and every fight to get guaranteed impact. The last thing you need to understand about this is that some matchups can change dramatically based on individual skill. Find your weak and strong matchups, improve your individual skill to better your percentages in those matchups, and set up more favorable engagements, and you will get a ton more value game after game. For the third tip, we need to talk about respect granted versus respect earned. It's very easy to over-respect an enemy to the point where you are not getting enough value. Maybe you're afraid that the Widow is going to headshot you, or you're afraid you're going to get hooked by a Roadhog, but playing overly safe, trying never to die, can leave a ton of value on the table that you could have gotten if you would have just pushed with less respect. However, having no respect for the enemy, especially if there should be respect given, or the enemy has already proved that you should respect them, leads to you feeding and trying way too much to get impact and be greedy and die. So there's a balance between caution and confidence that needs to be made, and it changes every game depending on who you're up against and who you're playing. Realizing that every single enemy deserves a certain amount of respect, and that is going to be on a shifting bar that you can move multiple times throughout a match under different conditions. And the idea here is to respect the enemy just enough so that they can never get easy kills on you or easy value, but never respect them any more than that so you get the maximum impact in your games. Next up, we got to talk about playing around counters. Now, there's hard and soft counters. Soft counters loosely shut down your play style and make it hard for you to play. We talked about the Zen Tracer instance. And then there's hard counters that's much more similar to rock, paper, scissors that make it very hard for you to actually play the game. Now, luckily, because of Overwatch 2, there's a lot less hard counters that exist in the game, but there are still some, like, for instance, Hammond into a Sombra is still very, very hard to play, and I would consider it a hard counter. But there are ways to play around even hard counters, and especially soft counters. And you have to ask yourself, what is the win condition? How do I get impact with this character? And what can I do to completely play around this counter of mine? Let me give you this example. You're playing Genji, and the enemy has a Pharah Mercy, which is soft countering you pretty hard. You can't do anything to her. You can't kill the Mercy. You can't kill the Pharah. There's literally nothing you could do about them. However, the enemy other support is isolated now because they no longer have the peel from the Mercy. So that gives you a key opportunity or a key win condition that you can exploit by diving that support, putting extra pressure on them. The Mercy is put in a very uncomfortable position, and either choice, whether she continues to pocket the Pharah while she lets her team die or leaves the Pharah, potentially getting killed herself or leaving more opportunity for her Pharah to get killed, is never a good situation. And that's a way where you can kill the other support, kill the other DPS, fight the tank, and the Pharah might have gotten some value, but if you could do this faster with a better sense of execution, you could still win the fight even in spite of never being able to target or deal with that soft counter. Now, this is not always going to be possible, but it is important that not every counter deserves a swap, and there's many ways to get your character to work even in spite of a soft counter that is on the battlefield. Now, for number 5, we gotta talk about caring about stats too much, which is a really common problem in general. Pretty much every game, people love stats, but stats are very often misconstrued and don't explain the full story. If you're a Widowmaker, for instance, and you've gotten 5 kills that no one helped you with, you're gonna have very little damage because you did no trash damage, and you're going to have very impactful kills because you did it without it getting healed or any team assistance. You could have a teammate that has more kills than you and much more damage, but most of their damage was healed up, and the majority of their kills were just follow-ups or done with their entire team. Your impact is more, but your stats are less, and that's just one example of many. Just because your stats are relatively worse doesn't mean you're playing relatively worse. It's very important that you don't over-obsess about these stats. Instead, obsess about the mistakes you're making game after game and the needless deaths that you're having that could have been avoided if you would have played in a different way. Now, as a simple one, let's talk about how boops and crowd control works. If you are booped, you have directional influence, meaning that if you get booped off, you can push forward and still fly close to the edge. However, if you get booped or locked in a crowd control and then booped again, you will go absolutely launched, which leaves a lot of people in shock. They're like, how did I just go flying? So, for instance, if a Hammond slams you and you get Lucio booped, you will go flying like all the way to Narnia. Like, it's crazy. You will get launched. And another thing about how this works is if an enemy is jumping off the edge or pushed off the edge, whatever character you are, if you melee them, you will get kill credit and ultimate to reflect their health pool. Now, that's because every melee technically does a slight amount of CC or a slight amount of boop, so it overrides whatever happened to them prematurely and you get extra ult for it. The next thing that we need to talk about is staggering. And it's very important to understand that the general best practice that you should be trying in every single game is a full team fight, 5v5. If you have one person that is playing alone, dies, and then 4 people come back, and then you go and try to contest or fight with 4 people against 5, you're at a fundamental disadvantage. That's just numbers. So it's really important that you are not staggering and you're challenging the enemy as a full fighting force. And I know that you can't control your team on this, and your teammates are going to do this a lot, I promise you, but you should never do it. Don't let your teammates staggering turn into your staggering, and never stagger yourself. In addition to this, if the fight is lost and the payload is being pushed forward or the push cart, it's very important that you die on cart. Many people try to run away when it's not realistic. They try to get out or get additional value, and they die late, meaning they will respawn late, meaning that your team is going to go contest the cart without you, and the enemy got free cart movement or push movement when you could have just pushed your body straight to cart, died, and had a clean reset with your team. Next up, we gotta talk about investing ultimates versus holding ultimates. You need to evaluate how a team fight is progressing at all times. You can look at how many people are alive and what characters are alive. Of course, a tank being alive matters a lot more than a DPS or support being alive, because one tank, especially if everyone else dies, the tank is gonna be able to maintain the point and take the space, and he's a lot harder to deal with unless you have numbers advantage. Now, when you know that a fight is close, investing ultimates can be a decent thing to turn that tide. Investing a certain amount of ultimates can basically overcome the numbers parity. Now, when you're at a disadvantage, ultimates that are done successfully can bring back a numbers disadvantage when you even have people down, but it's far more risky. It's not as guaranteed, and it's going to be up to your own personal ultimate usage and the conditions to know, can I bring back this numbers disadvantage with my ultimate? A lot of times, the best choice is to just save it and have a full team fight, wait for a parity, and start off the next team fight when you're at parity with that ultimate, because it's going to be more guaranteed than trying to turn a team fight. Like, imagine nanoblading when you're in a 5v5, a lot more easy to get some kills and win that fight, versus trying to nanoblade when it's 2v4. You could kill everyone, but your margin for error is much, much lower, and if you don't have to make that clutch play, perhaps it's better that you don't, unless you're incredibly confident in your own skill, or there's some set conditions that make that blade going off very, very easy. The next thing that we need to talk about is stupid team play. Now, if you have a stupid teammate and they're making really bad decisions like fighting alone and dying, there are ways that you can play to make your team play less dumb. Either you're peeling for a team, pocketing a teammate that is in a bad position, or you're going in with them and doing damage on the flank, for instance. These are some examples where you take a teammate that by himself would have fed and died, and you're adding your own impact to whatever he's doing to either protect him and prevent him from feeding, or ensure his play goes successfully. And sure, if he would have just made the play by himself, he would have died and fed, but it's your SR that you lose regardless. So it's important to think about the impact that your teammates are adding to a team fight, and what can you do to best utilize your team to stop them from feeding and make better plays. Next up, we gotta talk about VOD reviewing, where you go back and look through your own gameplay and you analyze the mistakes that you're making and the deaths that you made that you could have avoided. And you're also trying to be hypercritical of what you could do better and what you need to work on in the future. Now, you could do this a lot yourself and get a ton of value from it, but after that, I would highly suggest going and seeking out someone to VOD review your gameplay and give you actionable advice about where to improve and the mistakes you're making, even if it's just a buddy. But if you have no one, you can always go check out the Discord in the description down below and hit me up. I do some paid VODs here and there, but it doesn't have to be me. There's a ton of people that can provide you great value by VOD reviewing your gameplay, and I've had some of the best developments individually as a player. When I got VOD reviewed, I was stuck in Masters for a very long time, had a VOD review, shot straight up to top 500, and it was an amazing experience. The next thing that you need to understand is that you won't win every game, and that's okay. A lot of this is developing yourself as a player, and as you get the skills required to climb, your win rate will skyrocket and you will win. It's important that you just try to take every engagement as best you can. I notice the flaws in your gameplay that you want to improve on. Don't think about only winning and trying to secure that dub. I mean, of course you want to try, but at the end of the day, once you become that better player, you will climb no matter what. So just optimize for improving instead. Next up, we gotta talk about positioning fundamentals, and I could do a whole video on positioning. You gotta let me know down below if you want to see that, because positioning is a very complex topic. But let me give you some positioning fundamentals that you could utilize in every game. First off, play high ground and utilize it as much as possible. If enemies are on the high ground, find a way to route as yourself or as a team to contest them so they're not above you looking down, because that gives them a ton of flexibility. Not only can they peek over the edge and see you and then back up and you can't see them, but if you're ever in a situation where you're low, it's very hard for you to go chase them to the high ground, while every single character can jump down and chase you to the low ground. That gives them mobility just from controlling the high ground. In addition to this, natural cover. Finding yourself isolated in the middle of the open gives you very little options if an enemy pops like a high noon, for instance. I really love to think about what would happen if an enemy pops attack visor or a high noon. If you're close to some form of cover on the map, you could easily get out of those and live very, very simply. But if you're isolated out in the open, unless you hit a crazy skill shot on that enemy, you're gonna die every single time. And having that cover gives you a ton more flexibility and survivability. So you really want to play in and around natural cover at nearly every stage of the game besides a full-on attack execution. Now for the 13th tip, this one is Overwatch 2 specific, but I gave this advice in Overwatch 1 as well. Supports need to frag more. One of the biggest problems with supports going from Overwatch 1 to Overwatch 2 is the lack of impact of healing and the increase in impact and need of dealing damage and making plays with your abilities. Because supports not only heal themselves over time, but there's only one tank to heal, supports need to be actively contributing to a team fight far more than they did in Overwatch 1. If you have a cracked out healing stat, that doesn't matter nearly as much as making proactive plays. Like if you're playing Ana, you should be looking to deal far more damage and get crazy impactful nade plays, for instance. I preached this even in Overwatch 1, and now it's more important to do. Don't think about supports as healers, think about them as supports that are trying to add overall impact and value to every team fight. And some of the biggest team diffs you see, if you look at the supports, you'll see one support on one team that has almost almost no contribution to the damage or kills that are being generated by their team, and instead just has a really high heal stat, which is not doing enough to win team fights. And the next thing we need to talk about is that you're flexing too hard. And no, I'm not talking about the creatine. I'm talking about you playing way too many characters, especially within your role inside of a game. If someone just throws a suggestion out to you, you'll play it. You're like, hey, we need a Reaper. Oh, we need a hit scan. Hey, we need a Genji to dive. Hey, we need this. We need that. And they're basically deciding for you. And you're flexing to everything under the sun. But there's a lot of problems with this, not only for your performance in game, but your development as a player. Flexing when you're not comfortable on a character doesn't actually accomplish what you think it does. If you're not good enough, a good enough shot to play a soldier that can counter the Pharah main, then flexing to him is not gonna actually accomplish what you need it to. That Pharah might be incredibly used to playing against hit scan mains at your rank, but you're not a hit scan main at your rank. You might be a Genji main or a Hanzo main at your rank, but swapping to a character that you're not very comfortable on with an intent to counter, hoping that its strength in the matchup overcomes your lack of ability, that's not gonna be a recipe for success all that much. On top of that, specialization is how you truly improve in this game, by honing down your hero pool and really trying to focus on the characters that you want to be good at. If you try to play every single character and every single role and become this ultimate flex god, it doesn't actually reflect positively in your SR. Every single character in the game has a very high skill ceiling and is also complex, so putting more time and effort into mastering them will often give you far better results than trying to get small advantages in the individual matchups that we talked about previously, especially because players that really optimize their character choice are going to know how to play all their matchups and play them well and still play for the win condition. So even if you have a character that is slightly better than average in the matchup, that doesn't mean you're going to get any value, and you're not bringing enough outright value because your lack of mastery on any character. Speaking of value, the next thing I have for you is to get value out of every ability. I want you to really evaluate your ability use and how you're using your abilities versus what you're getting out of them. Oftentimes, players will use some abilities that they're either wasting or they're actually getting very little value, if at all, and there's a much better situation that you could have used it. The obvious ones are like getting low charge off of a bubble, but there's even bigger opportunity that you could be missing out on, like not getting a huge 3-man nade that you could have, and instead of doing that, you heal an ally for very little amounts of health when you didn't need to use your ability. Think of every single ability as a certain amount of impact that you could get, and it's important to optimize that because over the course of a game, you use your abilities even more than you use your ultimates, and you need to be thinking about how they're contributing to every single team fight. The next thing that you should definitely do is watch streams and pros of your main. This is one of the most important things that you can do to develop yourself even further by analyzing how a pro player actually engages every single matchup in the game, what they do to find value, and how they get value no matter what set of conditions, even when they're struggling. Of course, we could be wowed by their mechanical skill, but I want you to really take note of their decision making and how you can apply some of that to your gameplay to better know how to treat or engage certain matchups, understand how special interactions play, and overall increase your game sense about your character and the game as a whole. The next thing that you need to have if you're going to play Overwatch is that impenetrable mindset. You're going to have throwers, you're going to have people that are toxic for no reason, and you're gonna have very passive-aggressive people, which is my personal pet peeve. But regardless, you need to have that impenetrable mindset where you're in the long grind. It doesn't matter what the people around you are saying, the negativity, it doesn't matter about the wins or losses now, because it's only a matter of time until you're good enough to climb past all these people, surpass your limits, and get to exactly where you want to go. But if you let yourself give in to toxicity, you let yourself get down on your own skill or lose all your confidence, then you're never gonna make it there. You're gonna stop far before you ever see that true increase in your performance. Next up, we gotta talk about expectation versus what is happening. This kind of goes right along with that impenetrable mindset, but this is where a lot of the toxicity comes from, where you expect certain things from your team and you get very angry when those things don't happen. The enemy has a Pharah, and you have a hit scan, and you expect him to just 2-tap that Pharah. But guess what? That's probably not going to happen. You can't rely on your team to do what they have done in the past or what they should potentially do. That's not how you're actually going to climb. At the end of the day, you have a whole bunch of teammates that might do their job, might not, might do something that is completely not their job, but you're a fan of it, or they just might do something completely random. You have no idea, but at the end of the day, you are the constant. You're the one bringing consistent value to your team. You're also the difference maker in every single game. You want, whenever you step foot in a lobby, your team has a huge advantage because you are that advantage. Just because your team don't do their job, that doesn't mean that the game is lost, and it doesn't mean that it's not partially your fault for losing that game. Remember, you have to go above and beyond, especially the people around you. If you're not going above and beyond each and every game, then you don't deserve the next rank. That's what everyone has to do. You can't just be doing your job. You have to do more. You have to be a better difference maker and a much higher impact consistent value. Now, for number 19, you need to find your individual weakness. This is something that is hard to do sometimes. You have to be very raw with yourself and acknowledge where you're lacking in the game. Do you not know enough about the game? Is your mechanics really trash? Are you dying for free? What is your weakness? There's always a weakness that you need to identify and work on, but it requires you to drop that ego and really work on yourself. If you truly want to improve, this is the best way to do it. Now, for the last tip I'll give you is you got to find that positive duo. It doesn't necessarily matter if this duo is going to be someone that carries you or performs very well. What matters the most is a duo that's going to have the right mental attitude. Someone that wants to improve, is actively seeking a better rank like you, and keeps the mental up, keeps the vibes up. Not only is this going to help you navigate the toxicity and craziness of ranked, but together you'll push each other to be better, and y'all will both climb much more quickly. But I hope you enjoyed the video. These are the top 20 things that I wish I knew. But if you want more in-depth content and tons of videos, you gotta smash that like, subscribe, because we're gonna be breaking down so much on this channel. And if you need to find that positive duo in your life, go check out the Discord down below.